Perhaps she would have to look into it sometime. As she danced that night, Princess Fayu had looked truly beautiful. She resembled the heroine of one of the illustrated story scrolls the women so enjoyed. It was almost hard to believe she was the same woman as the stoic and reticent princess. Maomao went back to the Jade Pavilion, but her thoughts were less elevated. She wished she could bottle love. What a medicine it would be, one that could make a woman so beautiful. Chapter 12 The Threat. There was a crash. The porridge made of boiled potatoes and grains went flying, along with the tea and the crushed fruits. Maomao, her clothes soaked in porridge, looked up at the person in front of her. Would you dare serve this tripe to Lady Lihua? Make it again and do it right this time. A young woman with heavy makeup glared at Maomao. She was one of Consort Lihua's ladies in waiting. What a pain. Maomao sighed and began gathering the dishes and cleaning up the spilled food. She was in the Crystal Pavilion, Lady Lihua's residence. Unfriendly gazes surrounded her. Mocking looks, scornful eyes, and downright hostile expressions met her. For a servant of Consort Jayukayu like Maomao, this was truly enemy territory, a bed of nails. His Majesty had come to Jayukayu's chambers the night before. Maomao had tasted the food for poison as she always did. She had been about to leave the room when the Emperor himself spoke to her. He said, "I have a request for the apothecary of whom I've heard so much." Wonder what exactly he has heard. The Emperor was a robust man and handsome, only in his mid-30s. He was the absolute ruler of this nation. No wonder he dazzled the women of the rear palace. Maomao was one of the few exceptions. She thought only one thing about the Emperor. It was that he had a really long beard. I wonder what it feels like to touch. Now she asked, "What might that be, Your Majesty?" with a deferential bow of the head. She knew she was insignificant before the Emperor. She understood that a breath from His Majesty could blow away her life. She wanted to get out of the room before she accidentally breached etiquette somehow. Consort Lihua is feeling unwell. Perhaps you could look after her for a while. Well, there it was. Maomao wanted her head and her shoulders to maintain close relations for a long time to come, so the only possible answer was, of course, sire. By look after her, Maomao understood His Majesty to mean make her better. The Emperor no longer favoured Consort Lihua with his visits, but perhaps some vestige of his affection remained, or perhaps he simply knew he couldn't neglect the daughter of a powerful man. It made no difference. If Maomao did not help her, she could not expect to hold onto her head for very long. She and Lihua would share the same fate, in a manner of speaking. The Emperor asking this of a young girl like Maomao meant one of two things. Either he knew the doctor of the rear palace could not be relied upon, or he did not care if either or both of them died. It was a reckless request, no matter how you looked at it. The more time Maomao spent with the people who ruled in the imperial palace, those who lived above the clouds as the saying went, the more she realized how much trouble their commands and desires caused. Did he really have to ask her right in front of his other consort? She almost marveled at a man who could make such a request of her, then eat a luxurious meal and be intimate with Consort Jayukayu immediately afterwards. Perhaps that was simply how you saw the Emperor. When Maomao began to care for Consort Lihua, she first focused on improving the woman's diet. The poisoner's face powder had been removed from use in the rear palace by Jinchi's order. Thorough punishment was also appointed for the merchants who had originally brought it in. It would not be possible to get more of the stuff from now on. Therefore, the priority had to be removing the remaining toxins from Lihua's body. Her current meals were based on bland congee. However, it was frequently topped with things like deep-fried fish, broiled pork, red and white bean buns, and other rich foods such as shark fin or crab. Nutritious, true enough, but the food was too heavy for the stomach of someone recovering. Forcing herself not to salivate, Maomao told the cook to change the menu. The weight of an imperial assignment gave even an unimportant lady-in-waiting like Maomao a certain amount of authority. Lihua's meals were made to consist of porridge, rich in fibre, tea, an excellent diuretic, and fruit, easily digested. Unfortunately, all of these were now scattered on the ground. Maomao was raised in the red light district, so she was appalled by the waste of food. The women of the Crystal Pavilion were not as impressed by Maomao's imperial commission as they were displeased that she served their rival, Consort Jayukayu. Maomao would have gladly given them all a piece of her mind. Instead, she bit her tongue and cleaned up the mess. Lihua's ladies-in-waiting brought the consort sumptuous meals, but over time they came back more and more untouched. Presumably, the ladies got to enjoy the leftovers. Maomao would have liked to perform a proper physical examination of the patient. However, Lihua's canopied bed was surrounded by a phalanx of ladies-in-waiting. They were collectively performing a rather ungracious and ineffective nursing duty. When they provoked a cough by slapping whitening powder on Lihua's face while she was asleep, they would exclaim, "The air is bad in here. It's this noxious worm." Then they would chase Maomao out of the room. She could not get to Lihua to do an exam. I have no question in my mind. At this rate she will keep wasting away until she dies. Perhaps she had taken in too much of the poison, and it was too late to get it out of her system. Or maybe she simply wasn't strong enough. If a person did not eat, they would die. Lihua seemed to be losing her will to live. Maomao was leaning against a wall and counting the days her head would likely remain attached to her body. Then she heard a shrill sound of coquettish voices. She had a very bad feeling about this. She raised her head very slowly and found herself confronted with a gorgeous face. The face was smiling like the sun. It was the beautiful eunuch. "You look troubled," he said. "Do I?" Maomao replied tonelessly, her eyes half closed. "I wouldn't have said it if you didn't." He stared straight at her, so she tried looking away instead. He leaned in, his eyelashes noticeably long, to counter her. When their eyes met again, Maomao very much broke her promise to Gaoshun. She adopted the expression of someone looking at a piece of garbage. "What is with that girl?" The words were soft but venomous. Maomao was referring to the woman who had spilled the food. She was insufferable and she truly exuded menace. A woman's wrath was a terrible thing, but Jinshi nonetheless said softly into her ear with his honeyed voice, "Shall we go inside?" Maomao found herself pushed into the room before she could object. The chamber's self-appointed guardians looked even more dangerous than before. But when they saw the nymph beside Maomao, they immediately put on nonchalant smiles. These smiles were obviously forced. Truly, women could be terrifying creatures. Surely you agree it is unbecoming for lovely, talented young ladies to make a hash of the emperor's good offices. The women paused, then they bit their lips. One by one they backed away from the bed. "There now, go," Jinshi said, giving Maomao a little shove on the back. She almost toppled over. She bowed and approached the bed, then took Lihua's hand. It was pale and the veins stood out prominently. Maomao had some experience with the practice of healing, though perhaps not as much experience with the concoctions that did the healing. Lihua's eyes were closed, and she did not fight Maomao. It was hard to tell if she was awake or asleep. She already seemed to have one foot in the grave. Maomao placed a finger on Lihua's face, hoping to get a better look at her eye. She was greeted by a slick, slippery texture. Lihua's skin was as pale as it had ever been. Has it changed? Maomao frowned and then went over to the ladies in waiting. She stood in front of one of them, the one who had been making up the consort earlier. In a deliberately soft, restrained voice, Maomao asked, "You? Are you the one who does the ladies' makeup?" "I certainly am. It is a lady-in-waiting's duty, you know." The woman seemed mildly intimidated by Maomao's searing look. It obviously took everything she had to remain defiant. "We want consort Lihua to be as beautiful as she can be always." The girl sniffed, she sounded so sure of herself. "Is that right?" A crack echoed through the room. The girl stumbled to the side, moving with the force of the impact, hardly knowing what had happened. She felt an unfamiliar heat in her cheek and ear. Maomao's right hand smarted. It burned almost as much as the girl's left cheek. Maomao had smacked her as hard as she was able. "What is wrong with you?" one of the other ladies in waiting demanded. Several of them were openly astounded. "Me. I am just giving an idiot her due." Maomao grabbed the girl by the hair, pulling her to her feet. "Ow, that hurts, stop." The lady in waiting wailed, but Maomao paid her no heed. She dragged the girl over to the makeup stand and picked up a carved jar with her free hand. She opened the lid and smeared the contents on the face of the lady in waiting. White powder went everywhere, causing coughing fits. Tears brimmed in the young woman's eyes. "There, now you can be as beautiful as your lady." "Lucky you." Maomao gave a tug of the girl's hair, forcing her to meet her eyes. She leered like a beast with its prey in its claws. "You can have poison in your pores, in your mouth, in your nose, in every part of your body. You can wither away just like your beloved Lady Lihua. until your eyes are sunken and your skin is bloodless. No, I don't believe you, the newly powdered lady-in-waiting simpered. You don't understand why this stuff was forbidden, do you? It's poison. Maomao was well and truly angry now. It wasn't because of the sneers and glares. It wasn't because of the spilled porridge. It was because of this foolish lady-in-waiting who thought of nothing but assumed she was right about everything. She said, but it's the prettiest, the most beautiful. I thought Lady Lihua would be happy. Maomao dipped her hand in the powder scattered on the floor. Then she grabbed the girl's cheek, pulling and distorting her lips. Who would be happy to be continually covered in poison that sucks their life away? It sounded like listening to a child trying to explain why they had done something wrong. Maomao clicked her tongue and let the woman go. A few long strands of dark hair remained wrapped around her fingers. All right, go rinse your mouth out and wash your face. She watched the girl all but flee the room, weeping. Then she turned to the other ladies in waiting, who were now thoroughly frightened. Go on, do you want that stuff to get on the patient? Clean it up. She pointed to the powdery floor, deciding to ignore the fact that she was the one who had spilled it. The other ladies in waiting winced, but then went to get the cleaning supplies. Maomao crossed her arms and snorted. Some of the powder was on her clothes, but she did not care. One person had remained calm and collected throughout all of this. Jinchi said now, tucking his hands into his wide sleeves, women are indeed terrifying. Maomao had completely forgotten he was there. Arg, she said as the rush of blood to her head subsided. She squatted down right where she was. Now she had done it. Chapter 13, Nursing. Consort Lihua's condition was worse than Maomao had thought. She changed the millet porridge to thin gruel, but Lihua could hardly sip it from the spoon. Maomao had to work Lihua's mouth open, pour the gruel in, and gently help her to swallow. It wasn't the most decorous routine, but this wasn't the moment to worry about decorum. The biggest problem was that Lihua wasn't eating. An old proverb said a healthy diet was as restorative as good medicine. Maomao knew her patient wouldn't get better if she didn't have some food. And so she continued to try and feed Lihua persistently. She had the air in the room changed. The cloying scent of incense lessened, and was replaced by the characteristic odor of a sick person. They must have been burning the incense hoping to cover the smell of Lihua's body. How long had it been since she had a bath? Maomao felt ever more enraged at the witless ladies in waiting. At least the young woman Maomao had upbraided seemed to have learned something from it. The whitening powder she had been using on Lihua had been from her own secret stash. Sadly, the eunuch who had failed to find and confiscate the powder was condemned to be beaten. Birth could affect even the punishments one received. Maomao derided the eunuch in charge of all this as a worthless idiot to his face, but it did not seem to mean much. He was one of those high-born people with special proclivities. Maomao had a cloth and a bucket of hot water ready. She then called the other ladies in waiting to help her wash Consort Lihua. The ladies looked uncomfortable, but they went along meekly at a glare from Maomao. Consort Lihua's skin was so dry the water hardly beaded on it. Her lips were painfully cracked. They put honey on her lips instead of red makeup. Her hair was tied back in a simple knot. Now they just needed to get her to drink some tea whenever possible. Sometimes she was given watered-down soup instead. It would help her get some salt. This would cause her to use the toilet more, expelling toxins from her body. Maomao had thought the consort might reject this unusual new caretaker, or even think of her as an enemy, but Lihua was as pliant as a doll. Looking at her vacant eyes made one wonder if she even knew one person from another. Then they were able to increase her portion of gruel. It went from half a bowl to an entire bowl, and then they added some rice and grains. When Lihua was able to chew and swallow without help, meat stock was added. This made a savory soup along with mashed fruits. One day when she had managed to use the toilet on her own, Lihua suddenly spoke. She asked why Maomao stood closer to catch the whispered words. Why didn't you just let me die? The voice was vanishingly small. Maomao frowned. If that is what you want, then just stop eating. The fact that you keep taking your gruel tells me you do not want to die. And then she offered Lihua some warm tea. The woman gave a gentle cough. I see. She smiled, however, faintly. Lihua's ladies-in-waiting tended to have one of two reactions to Maomao. Either they were terrified of her or they were terrified of her but still fought back. Guess I went a little too far. Once Maomao's emotions hit a boiling point, she was wont to boil over herself. She knew it was a bad habit. She had even abandoned the delicate language of the court for more uncouth expressions. Maomao might not show much emotion, but she had a warm heart. It honestly hurt her to see people regard her from afar as if looking at a devil or a monster. She explained this recent outburst to herself. It happened while she was taking care of Lady Lihua. It had been necessary. Jinshi appeared frequently. Maomao did not know if the emperor had ordered his visits or if consort Jyokayu had requested them. Determined to make use of everything available to her, she asked him to have a bath added to the crystal pavilion. The existing bathing facilities were expanded to include a steam bath. Maomao tried, indirectly of course, to communicate to Jinshi that he wasn't very helpful and wasn't really wanted there, but he still stopped by to smile at her at every opportunity. He was as tenacious as a ghost haunting her. He was clearly a eunuch with far too much time on his hands, Maomao concluded. She wished he would take a cue from Gaeshun. Gaeshun at least had the decency to bring treats whenever he showed up. A person as thoughtful as that might make someone a good husband, even if he was a eunuch. Lihua, meanwhile, was encouraged to consume fiber, drink water, and to sweat. Anything that would help move the poison out of her system was helpful. 2 months passed, and consort Lihua was finally able to walk on her own. She had already been in a severe condition because of her emotional malaise. Maomao judged that as long as she didn't take in any more of the toxins, she would be all right. It would take some time for her to regain her healthy figure and the flush in her cheeks. She no longer seemed to be standing on the banks of the river that divided this world from the next. The night before Maomao was to return to the Jade Pavilion, she went to pay her formal respects to consort Lihua. She half expected to be dismissed as someone too lowly to merit the consort's notice, but that was not the case. Lihua, she learned, had her pride, but she wasn't prideful. With all that had happened surrounding the prince, Maomao had come to think of Lihua as quite a disagreeable woman. In fact, she had the comportment and personality of a true imperial consort. "I will take my leave tomorrow morning, milady," Maomao told her. She added some instructions regarding what the lady was to eat. She also gave a few other cautionary pieces of advice and then went to leave the room. But Lihua said from behind her, "Young lady, do you suppose I will ever be able to bear another child?" Her voice was flat and affectless. "I don't know. The only way to find out is to try. But how, when His Majesty no longer has any interest in me?" Her meaning was clear. She had only conceived the prince because the emperor happened to visit her after his time with his favorite, consort Jyokayu. The little princess and the little prince were 3 months apart in age. This revealed the truth of the matter. His Majesty ordered me to come here originally. Now that I am leaving, I believe you will see him again. It was not a political problem, nor was it an emotional one. The problem was the same for both of them. The rear palace was as it was, so love and romance had no place here. "Do you think I can yet win over consort Jyokayu? I ignored her advice and killed my own child when I did so. I don't think it's a question of winning. And as for our mistakes, we can learn from them." Maomao took down a vase that was decorating the wall. It was a slim vase designed to hold a single flower. At the moment, it held a star-shaped bellflower. There are hundreds, even thousands of kinds of flowers in the world, but who would dare say whether the peony or the iris is the more beautiful? I don't have her jade eyes or fiery hair. If you have something else instead, then there is no problem. Maomao's gaze travelled down from consort Lihua's face. They always said those were the first things to go when you lost weight. However, Lihua still had her ample endowment. "I think size like that is quite a treasure," she said. Maomao had seen a great deal in the brothels, so she should know. She kept to herself the fact that she had been struck by a certain amount of amazement every time they bathed the consort. Given that Lihua was the rival of her own mistress, Maomao could not help her out too much. However, she decided to give the woman a last gift before she left. "May I whisper in milady's ear?" Then, quietly so that no one else would hear her, she gave consort Lihua some advice. A secret technique, One of the older ladies of the night had told her could not hurt to know. Sadly, Maomao lacked equipment of the necessary size, but this particular technique seemed perfect for consort Lihua. Lihua's face went as red as an apple when she heard it. What Maomao said to her was debated by Lihua's ladies in waiting for some time, but it was all the same to Maomao. After this, His Majesty's visits to the Jade Pavilion became noticeably less frequent. With a mixture of irony and real relief, Consort Jaikai only said, "Phew, finally I can get a little sleep." Maomao gawked in surprise, but that is a story for another time. Chapter 14 The Fire. There, I knew it. Balancing a laundry basket in one arm, Maomao smiled. Those were red pines growing in a grove near the eastern gate. The gardens of the rear palace were deftly manicured.